Hey everyone, welcome back to another edition of the SourceGraph podcast. I'm Byung again. Today I'm here with Sean Wang, also known as Swix online. Swix is the co-founder of Svelte Society, which fosters the community around Svelte.js around the world. He also grew the team of moderators that runs the React subreddit, is a prominent member of that community. And he's also a prominent member of the Learn in Public movement. And he shares his insights on learning and leveling up in code with everyone. He's the author of the Coding Career Handbook, a book about how to grow from a junior to a senior developer. And he's written a ton of great blog posts, some of which we'll hopefully get into, that range from topics like the state of the JavaScript ecosystem to the economics of API development. He's worked on developer experience at Netlify, AWS, and now Temporal. And he also has a great podcast and newsletter, which you all should subscribe to. So with that, Swix, welcome to the show.
That was a great intro, Byung. Thank you. It's an honor to be on.
Awesome. So, before we get into like all that, I always like to start out by asking folks, like for you, the journey into programming in the world of code, how did that start?
Yeah, I have one of those multiple stutter stop starts. So this is a complicated question for me, and I'm not super proud of it, but it's just the truth. And I think there are a lot of people like me. So happy to tell that story. I guess the first interacted with code when I was like 12-ish. We had like a Q basic course in school. And I should have picked up on the clues because we were assigned to do like a basic, like a stack interpreter or like a stack program where we can pop things on and off the stack. And I was the only one that implemented a graphical user interface on top of my implementation. Everyone else did just like a simple CLI. I made a CLI in the UI. So I made a UI in the CLI to visualize the stack. Awesome. And then I stopped there. Because I was
that was cool. That was a fun project.
That's all I can do with it. And then I just went back to like playing Game Boy or something. And I should have just taken the hint that like I was interested in UI and I could go further than my peers. But anyway, so I didn't really touch programming. I think the other thing that probably a lot of people also resonate with was that I just didn't see myself like the other hackers. I saw some of my friends who were programmers getting in very early, just hammering away on the terminal, right? And I didn't know all these bash commands. And I was just like, I'm not like them. I don't know anything that they know, so that's probably not me. And so I fell into a different path, which was finance, and that was my first career. And this was very much in the context of the Great Recession, just seeing how badly everything was mismanaged and how much we had to learn about finance, and also wanting to be independent of the economic cycle, because I kind of saw hedge funds as the only way in which you could profit from things going down,
like a downturn.
Like most of the economy is tied to things going just positive beta, but in a hedge fund you can actually switch to a negative beta. So I basically set from my high school days set a goal for myself to work at a hedge fund. Over the next like 10-ish years I achieved that, but in the process, like you also start to learn to code, and this is the weird thing that's also becoming more and more true in the finance world. If you're young in finance, you basically become a programmer, just because the older people don't want to learn it, so they throw all the coding related stuff to the juniors, and of course they don't have a budget to hire like a dedicated programmer.
Sure.
So I started with VBA, just to automate Excel, and then Excel you hit some limits, and it's a very crude language. So then you go to Python, and then I was doing currency derivatives trading. So I did Haskell, and people always impressed that I learned Haskell and did production Haskell for 2 years, and I didn't consider myself a programmer, just because I didn't have a choice. That the house language, the house library for calculating option pricing was in Haskell.
Really?
So standard charted. It's pretty funny because like I think basically one guy got a job there and then just pulled in the entire like Haskell core team to work there, and I, at some point like standard charted, like the whole bank was just pot committed. They like had built so much infrastructure and then they just couldn't. So like it's pretty funny like amazing. how you embed a language community within a company and kind of don't give them a choice. This is a very similar thing that Jordan Walke did at Reason for Reason ML and Facebook. Now they're called Rescript, because if you just use it to build production infrastructure, then they now rely on it. And it's a very fun trick to grow a language. Anyway, so I never considered, like, I and just to be clear, like, I built tools that I could use for myself, right? So I did not consider myself a programmer. Although I could code, it was like 5% of my job rather than like 90% of my job, right? So that's the way that I would frame it. And eventually, I think what I realized was I was a code monkey. I was like a script monkey. Like, I would run analysis, do a lot of number crunching, and then my boss would be like, "But what about this other scenario?" And then I would have to go do a different scenario again. And I realized that I was kind of the bottleneck for my code. No matter how well I did, I was the sort of data analyst, like, so punching away at the thing. And I wanted to do user interfaces. That's the real unlock for turning business logic into products, essentially, right? that anyone could use. So then I pivoted hard into JavaScript, and that was actually harder to learn than Haskell, I would say.
Really?
Because it's a very incompatible and confusing ecosystem. Haskell is a very small user base. Everything is functionally typed. Like, there's very strong guarantees. JavaScript is none of that, right? Like, when I was learning it, it was still like, is this ES5? Like, we're going into ES6, like, but you have to transpile this here, and then, like, there's Node that's different from the browser stuff.
It's just all getting a dev environment set up. Just so many options.
So I did free code camp to kind of learn it nights and weekends, and then eventually decided, like, I need professional help, so I paid for a boot camp, and that started my dev career. I started out in Two Sigma, and when you do a career transition like that from finance to tech, the general advice I give people is to trade in, like, kind of like your used experience for your new one. So I managed to not start exactly from zero, because I could say that I could tell a story of, like, hey, I used to work in finance, but I want to switch to dev now.
Right.
You can use someone like of my background, because I know finance really well, but I'm a newer dev. So that's what Two Sigma hired me for, and then completely did not use the finance experience. Like, you tell one story when you to get the job, and then they completely mismanage you. So I was very bored. Then that's when I started the whole learning public thing, because I think in finance, that's the other story as well, which is, in finance, everything's very private, because it's a very zero-sum field. You don't want to share your secrets. Whereas in tech, it's fundamentally more open. And I was very frustrated within Two Sigma, because we weren't moving at all. Not even like fast enough. We just weren't moving at all. So I just started getting active in the New York tech scene. And New York City is a big part of my coming up story, which is I started doing talks and writing blog posts, and just generally plugging into what everyone else was doing. And I generally view this as like career advice for people as well. Like, sometimes if you only depend on your mentors at work, then it's kind of like the roll of the dice of, like, whether you get good mentors or not. But if you build a network externally, then you can pick your mentors, and that's a much wider field. So that's what happened to me. I started doing a lot of work on React, so I got involved in the React subreddit, helped to grow to I think from like 30,000 members to 220,000, and then I left. And then started getting into developer relations. So Netlify hired me to do DevRel, and then I joined AWS. I did that for 2 years, and then AWS, and now I'm head of DX at Temporal. That's a long story of my life.
That's such a whirlwind. I think the first question I want to ask is going from finance to just open source JavaScript communities. That's a pretty big leap, and I feel like finance is. It's a well compensated field, right? So a lot of people might be wondering how did you develop the kind of conviction or the courage to go and make such a big leap, especially since by a lot of people's standards, you probably had it pretty good, at least from a financial economic point of view.
Yeah, I probably made more. So I think my first year at the hedge fund I was at, Balyasny, I made $350K. And I would be making much more now. And so I would have made more in my finance career. But I really genuinely realized that money wasn't everything, and I just wasn't enjoying the job. And I wasn't bad, but I wasn't going to be a rock star in the industry. And so, we had an analyst ranking, and I came dead middle, And I was just I I'm working so hard. There's some nights I slept under the table, and then the real breaking point for me was I started having a heart palpitation about one of my positions where there was like an earnings call the next day. And I realized that if I had a heart attack and died doing this job.
Oh, like you had a literal like
palpitations. It started getting like a really. I just got so stressed out, and
that's crazy.
I was alone in my bed, and I was just like, okay, if this develops into a full-on heart attack because of my unhealthy lifestyle plus stress, what's the point?
Yeah, health is everything.
Yeah, so that was really my like breaking point. I was just like, okay, you know what? I can. I've always enjoyed this, like making the tools for finance for myself. And people have always said like this is something that I contribute a lot of value on. And then the finance part, like, it pays well, but I also don't super enjoy it, and it's very high stress. Maybe I just go all in on the tech side. So that's one thing. The second thing is I actually I spent a year as a non-technical PM at a fintech startup before making the leap to full developer. So
got it.
I actually took this very slowly. A lot of people would have just gone cold turkey right there, but I did 1 year as a non-technical PM, and I did free code camp to prove to myself that I could complete a coding curriculum before deciding to take the full-time leap.
Awesome. So like methodical and with kind of eyes wide open. I like it.
Yeah, well, I was giving up a lot, the finance career. Like I worked so hard since high school to get to a hedge fund, only to arrive and realize that it wasn't something I really wanted to do. So it was I can still go back if I want to, but now I don't. So
well, I'm sure, like, I'm super thankful, and I'm sure a lot of other people who've kind of learned from you are like super glad that you made the transition. So thank you for doing that. And
I think a lot. It's funny because like you often think like when people say money isn't everything, you think they're full of it, but it's really true.
Yeah. It's like there, that meme where it's like the bell curve, and it's like, on one it's like money isn't everything, and then in the middle it's like, oh yeah, make as much money as possible. But then like on the other end of it, it's like, money isn't everything. There's a lot to life.
There's a lot of bell curves. I've actually written blog posts about how pervasive the bell curve meme is in a lot of parts of our life. And I don't know, I think basically what that entails is like there are countervailing factors that underlie the bell curve that contribute to the end result of the bell curve.
Anyway. Cool. So like tell me about getting into React, because one of the things I like about you is you have such a multi-dimensional aspect to what you do. You do development, you do community building, you do a fair amount of like writing and talking about kind of like high level trends and ideas. So for you, as a person who's like new to the I guess like JavaScript world, how did you get into the React ecosystem, and specifically, how did you become one of the moderators of the React subreddit?
Oh yeah, I can tell that story. So we talked about how I realized that building UI is kind of the unlock for creating products. And that sparked an eventual journey towards web development in JavaScript and front end. And of course, React is that predominant front end framework. I actually started with Vue because I thought that Vue.js was just way easy to get started with. It looks more like HTML. But then I realized that all the jobs were in React. So I just pivoted and learned the most popular framework. And that's really it. React is the most predominant framework, most amount of jobs, and most biggest ecosystem. So I figured, other people can learn it. I can learn it too. I eventually got over all the learning hurdles, but I definitely say it was harder to learn than Vue.js. I think that got me my first job at Two Sigma. And then getting into the community was a matter of me being bored at work and wanting more professional growth. And so getting involved in the React New York City meetups was really important to me. And then writing blog posts about the new stuff that was coming out in React. Like it just so happened that when I was starting to write blog posts, that React had announced this new feature that was originally called async React, and now it's called concurrent React. And it was a big deal at the time. No one really knew what it was. So all I did was, as a new person, just going over the demos line by line and really explaining and understanding these concepts, and then just repeating that for the next 3 years. Because it turned out that it wasn't going to be released for another 3 years. It's still not fully released today.
Yeah.
But yeah, whenever I think people want to break into an industry, it can often help to focus on new shiny, because there's just less competition. And a lot of people, the downside is that you don't have as much context, right? So you do got to do the work to go back in time and look at history and look at like old discussions, to see where to place this in context. The upside is you just have more time to spend on this new stuff than everyone else who's actually working on real production stuff.
Right.
And so you have to respect that dynamic, which is that you're just like a journalist, trying to interpret what's going on as it happens.
Yeah.
And you're not going to know everything, and that's okay. I think the other part, which I accidentally stumbled into, there's this philosophy which I call pick up what you put down, pick up what others put down, which is if you want to guarantee a response from people when you write blogs or tweets, write about what they're doing, right? There's nothing people are more interested in than themselves or their work.
Like find someone else doing some like piece of work that you find interesting, and then just write your perspective on that.
And it should be something recent and new, because they'll be very keen to read what you came away from, even if it's wrong. And if it's wrong, they'll correct you, but what they won't do is ignore you. Which I think a lot of people when they create content, they struggle to get noticed, right? So I'm not saying to intentionally like try to provoke people with like sensational takes, but to really genuinely like be a partner, be a collaborator,
conversation.
Even exactly, start a conversation with the people working on interesting stuff, like including startups, right? Like I make it a habit to shout out startups that do interesting work. And I'm sure every single startup has a Slack channel that monitors their Twitter mentions, I'm sure everyone reads it. And if they say something really good, you'll retweet it. And if it's something wrong, you'll just correct it. And that's just how this works. And if you do that often enough, and you show that you're progressing with a good slope of learning, you become known as someone who just genuinely learns well and is a good member of the community. And then people are incentivized to work with you because you then amplify their message, right? Like I'm trying to get some message out there, but you for example, you have the burden of knowledge. Like you're an expert in this topic, and you only use terminology that makes sense to you, makes you look smart. Whereas I don't have any of that ego. I can just look as stupid as I want and use terminology that would make sense to a total beginner. That it's a really interesting phenomenon where you can turn ignorance into power instead of knowledge. And I definitely find a lot of that theme in my work.
And this kind of feeds into the whole value of learning in public too. And I like that aspect of it, because I think when you're building something, you just want to share it with the world, and you obviously think it's the best thing in the world, but the whole world also knows that you're the one who created it. So you're clearly biased. When someone else comes along and reacts to your work in any way, and as long as it's like good faith effort on both sides, like chances are you'll find some sort of like agreement or alignment of interests there. And that is just so powerful when you have that first kind of like external person, like the person who's like not involved with your project in any way, but tries it out, spends their time, and shares it with others. Like one endorsement from someone like that is worth like 100 of your own tweets or self promotions, however good, well intentioned or good natured.
Exactly. And I think it should be thoughtful as well. You can't just go like, I think this I think SourceGraph is great, and then end of story. You should go into a bit of why and like what makes a difference. Give some thought into it. But those that kind of feedback really helps, especially in the early days. So of course, when I was doing this for React was not early, but that part of React was early. And I think you can find parts of this in any ecosystem. I could go into Rails and do this exact same thing. I think it's just a career hack. I think kind of bringing this to the book and learn the public stuff. I think when people start out in tech, we always want to hire seniors. Every company in the world just wants independently capable senior engineers. But there's a lot of people coming out of boot camps, coming out of or self-taught or coming out colleges, and they don't really have that path from junior to senior. So I think this is a hack, just like trying out stuff from senior engineers and picking up what they put down. And just doing that for a couple of years, and eventually, soon enough, you're working with them at least on an informal basis, and pretty soon they'll turn it formal.
Yeah, that's awesome. Pick up what others put down. That's such a great maxim.
We have a I mean, it's one of like two acronyms that we use in our Discord. So we have a small like a private Discord for the book, and PUWPD. We just kind of put it in there. Everyone knows.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which looks like the beginnings of a cult, but hopefully it like benefits people.
Yeah. Anyway, all for good. Is that you said it was a private Discord? Like
it's like a paid Discord. So basically, this is the other insight that I had when people read books. When people watch movies, when they listen to podcasts, there should be a way to continue the conversation. Because it kind of sucks to like read something really good or listen to something really good, and then turn around and no one else around you has read it, and that you have to look for a community. So I always think that every book should essentially come with a Discord, and that's what I did for my book.
So like anyone who buys the book, reads it, can join this Discord and chat with others who is that the idea? Or
that is it's currently a second tier. So
got it.
It's like I basically, because there's two reasons for that. One is basically I just wanted to see if I could make a different tier for the book, But secondly, it is my live time. I'm in there every single day. Whereas the book is kind of like a one-off thing. So it was weird. Like, how do you put a value on your own time when it's potentially multi-year? So I just made up a number and said like it's $40, whatever, and then just threw it in there. Awesome. Discord isn't really geared for any sort of paid access. Like actually, any member in that Discord could create an invite and just like get their friends in. But I'm kind of relying on the fact that you get out what you put in, right? Like just getting membership isn't enough. You have to be an active participant. I have to chat with you. Like I've helped. Someone go from junior to senior actually within their career in that Discord. And I think their pay like went up like 80% just in the process, because we also talked about negotiation stuff. And it's
probably the best
really
$40
great.
they ever spent.
I think he's pretty happy. But and others just kind of lurk and they don't get any value out of it. So I don't really mind that much.
Cool. So what is it like to moderate like an online community of, what is it like? It went from 20,000 to 200,000. The React subreddit while you were a moderator. Like what was that like?
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention how I got involved. Essentially, I was a Redditor before I was on Twitter. Just because like I like talking about games, TV shows, movies, that kind of stuff. And so I discovered there's programming stuff on Reddit, and actually pretty active. And essentially, I think there was a flame war one day between frameworks. You know how people get really religious about frameworks, and Dan Abramov, because I've been corresponding back and forth with him on the async React stuff, was hey, next time you see this, can you shut it down? And I was like, I'm not a moderator. I don't have the ability to shut it down. And he like went away for 5 minutes, came back. He's like, now you are.
Nice.
that was the application process. I think it's some amount of trust, and the React team definitely cares about its community, which it's not part of their job, but it definitely is an extension.
It's so important.
So I think growing it is a matter of setting an example, setting rules, and then just showing up for a long time. It's the unglamorous part that people don't really get. Like the glamorous part is like being able to throw events, getting people hired,
right.
Having people launch demos and libraries in your community and having a positive response. That's a really awesome thing to support creators and promote projects that are worth that attention. But then the unglamorous part is dealing with people who are kind of mean. Reddit is a pseudonymous community, so people don't necessarily feel the need to be nice to each other. And then also the fact that people just kind of don't stick around. A lot of people join and leave, or they join and lurk. I think we had something like 1.6 million page views, but only on the order of like 2,000 to 3,000 comments a day.
Interesting.
So there's a lot of lurkers, and people
Yeah.
want free information, and that's just kind of how it is.
Yeah.
And so as a community manager, you don't have the power to make people do things.
Yeah.
You just have to make it an inviting environment where there's a reasonable expectation that if you put stuff up, you get a good response.
Yeah.
And then just let people bubble up through there. That's kind of how I kind of view it. And
Yeah.
it's just a role. It's definitely more of a service role than a job in my mind. But I think definitely this idea of technical community, people taking it more seriously, because ultimately that's the moat, right, around any company. Anyone like AWS can come along and clone any of your features eventually, but they cannot steal your community if you've built it strong enough, including your paid customers. I don't know if if they have a strong relationship with them, and so on. So yeah, I've been, one of my posts around this has been this idea of a technical community builder, and how more and more startups are trying to hire around this. I'm curious if you are actively building this for this role as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to spin up kind of a community around SourceGraph. We're kind of weird because our early adopter market was a fairly large engineering organizations and enterprises. I think that's just due to the nature of code search. A lot of these companies were experiencing the pains of the giant code bases, so much so that they were looking at building their own internal code search by the time that they found out about us. So it was kind of a much easier sell into those organizations. And so that's where we started. But we always, had this vision. The original vision for SourceGraph was just to build this single portal where all the code in the world, and the code that's you're interested in or might be interested in specifically is accessible from a single search box. And so a big effort for us right now is kind of warming this community back up, because it was just not a focus for our company for a number of years. But we think it is central to our mission and what we want to do. And I would love to hear your advice for both us and other developer tool creators and founders here about how to build and foster that strong technical community. So
yeah. So before, so I am not I don't have zero experience, but I'm also not the world expert on this thing.
Yeah.
So I should probably list out the stuff that I've done, right? So I helped to grow the React Reddit from 30 to 220,000, and then I left React and started Svelte Society from zero. From I held the first meeting.
Yeah.
And we're about to hit 10,000 people.
Nice.
And then I was part of Netlify as we sort of established the Jamstack community.
Yep.
And now we're trying to grow that at Temporal as well. So that's a similar. I think that we have a similar issue with Temporal as you do. We're adopted by people with microservice orchestration problems, which is generally large companies.
Yeah.
So it's a different topic from front end community where you can be productive with just a single person on a browser.
Yeah.
The advice that I typically give to people, because a lot of people definitely reached out to me after that blog post, is hire from your community rather than trying to install someone with a proven track record in a different community, because I don't think it transfers that well.
Yeah.
Because they might just fundamentally not get the community.
Yeah.
And you want someone who already embodies the kind of person that you want more of, right? So I always say pick the community member that who would most like to clone, because they would essentially, if you make that their whole job, then they will start cloning themselves in whatever way. It could be from product decisions, marketing messaging, to just the networks that they're already in. They just serve as a beacon or lighthouse for people like them to come on in.
Yep.
And so that's good and bad. You will necessarily exclude some people just as a result of unintentional consequences.
Yeah.
So you do have to pick somewhat carefully. But what I'm basically saying not to do is say, okay, this person has 10 years managing community at name your other startup. Let's just hire them. They've done it before. They can do it again here.
Right.
I don't think that works, because they may not get it.
Because so much of like the qualification for the role is just like understanding like your specific tool and how it impacts your users' lives, right?
Yeah.
So like that is like the most important qualifier, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Same thing for developer relations, by the way. The joke that I have is, don't hire an experienced DevRel person from some other community, and then expect them to npm install audience. Just doesn't. It's just like, okay, let's look for the highest follower count and then just hire that one, and then it's silly. Like they're as part of their community, and you really need to screen for, do they have the relationships and the fundamental background to be an evangelist and to connect people. So coming on to the difference between DevRel and community, community is much more about getting members talking to each other,
right?
Whereas DevRel is kind of content creation from like one to many instead of many to many.
I see.
And there's definitely some overlap. Like DevRel performs part of community membership, and that's mostly because community building is not so much of a recognized career path or discipline within tech companies just yet. We had a community support manager at Netlify, and they were kind of, there was no career path for them. They just kind of managed the forums, and it was just kind of off at the edges. But I definitely think what's happening right now is more people are realizing that community should be a bigger informer of like product decisions, marketing decisions, anything like that. And so it might be true that communities are basically moving from the periphery, where it's like okay, let's do everything first and then inform the community, towards more of like a community at the core, where like let's see what's going on in the community, what they're telling us, and drive those marketing or product decisions off of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think more and more people start to recognize the value of communities. It's one of those things where it's like it's difficult to put like a number on it or to like measure it in a traditional corporate setting, and so a lot of it is kind of just trust based. Like you have to find someone who gets your community and who you can like trust to do right by the community. Because I
have a couple other thoughts. I just want to make sure I mention them, because before we get too in the weeds on one angle. The other angle is I always like the idea that people are there for something bigger than themselves. And so the traditional element of this is a very marketing driven idea of category creation, right? We at Netlify, Netlify created the category of Jamstack, and got a lot of people, including competitors, to join this movement. And that's beneficial for you, just because if you led it and you coined it, you have a much better shot of owning this growing market. And so people also like talking about this idea better, because they don't necessarily promote you as a company, so you can remove that corporate interest, because this idea is just bigger than you, and it's much easier to join a community like that than to say join the SourceGraph community or join the Temporal community, because it's kind of more awkward to do free work, essentially. Like, if someone asks a question like, should the assigned support engineer do it, or should I, as a knowledgeable community member? If it's the SourceGraph forum, I'll just wait for someone from SourceGraph to do it,
Right.
But if it's if it's an open source or movement, if it's open source framework or a movement that's bigger than any one company, I'm more inclined to do that, because I want to be a prominent member of that community, or I want to, there's just more for me at stake.
Yeah, I mean, the way we think about it, and maybe we should just be more explicit about this as well, is like, for us, as a business, a lot of what we do is not so much promote SourceGraph, but just promote the idea of code search, because I think it's one of those ideas that is still at kind of the, like, it's definitely, I think it's going to be nearly ubiquitous in the next, couple of years. 5 years from now, people look back and say like, how did we ever, do development without code search everywhere? But right now it's still kind of this, best kept secret level sort of thing, where like there's a certain segment of developers who are just like completely sold on it. Like, people who worked at, Google or Facebook or, another big tech company that had a great internal code search. And then there's just like everyone else who has never used it before and just like don't get it. They're like, well, how's this different from, I can just grep for stuff. I check out most of the code that I interact with day to day on in my local editor. So like, I don't get it. And so maybe that's like the key insight for us, like code search. That's the thing that we want to make ubiquitous, and we should just push that because we think that's going to be like this great thing for the world. It's going to, unlock the world of code and make it accessible and valuable to so many new people out there, especially as like, the world of code is growing itself. You have all these new people getting into the industry, getting into the world of code now. Anyways, this is kind of turning into a sales pitch for SourceGraph. So I'll stop there.
Obviously you work on it every day, and people listening to the SourceGraph podcast, they signed up for this. It's very much, I think, as someone who's like, it's rare to have a CEO podcasting, so kudos on doing this. But people are signed up for the journey, right? They want to see your thoughts evolve, and if they have something that they want to contribute, they can listen to what you just said and say like, okay, I can get in on that, or here's how I think about it differently. And it's very much building in public, and I think that's always to be celebrated. You shouldn't be embarrassed about that. But yeah, no, I definitely think promoting the category makes more sense. There's another thing. So it's not just about getting your competitors, like being so unafraid of competitors that you're like, just come on in. I don't care. Like, let's make this a thing. And then the other thing is having people be part of, expect to be part of your community longer than any current employment. Like, that is a real community, right? You're not just joining a support forum for a vendor. This is literally like, I identify with this thing more than my current job.
Yeah. And that's so important. I feel like, and it has to be like an authentic thing, right? Because like I feel like for me at least, like every time I evaluate, a community or like a piece of technology or like even like a blog post, there's like this, detector in my mind. Is like, is this a real post or is this like content marketing? To sell me something, and it's just like such a sharp distinction. And I often think that like just being like writing the good post, like the thing that's like broadly educational, informative, insightful, is better in the long term than just like taking the shortcut and trying to like quick sell someone on a thing.
Yeah.
Anyways,
I do a lot of thinking. So this is one of the unresolved areas for me. What role do company blogs play?
It's an ongoing discussion for us right now too. But yeah, like. And have you read? Are you familiar with Dan Liu? Like his
I read his blog.
Yeah. He has a post on like what makes a good corporate blog.
Yes, he does.
And for those listening, I highly recommend that because he's got some good takes.
It's also very much like his takes, right? Like at the end of the day, sometimes you need to speak to non-engineers, and a company blog is a really good way to do that. Dan writes for engineers, and so he biases towards like, hey, GitLab had an outage and they live stream their outage. That's fantastic. And then they wrote their postmortem on their blog. Most sales, marketing people, that's cool. Transparency around your downtime, that's fine. But it's not going to sell me on your thing.
Let's talk more about the work you're doing now at Temporal, because I think it's really interesting, and maybe. Can we start with why you joined them in the first place? Because I think that there's an interesting backstory. There.
Yes. I don't know if we talked about this because I say it to a number of people, but it's something I haven't shared enough about. And it's like, what is a front end guy like me doing at a back end place like this? Essentially, I've never worked on a giant distributed system, and it's very strange journey. But essentially, so going from front end to back end is essentially the process of diving deeper and deeper into platforms and developer experience. So, I started at TuSigma as a front-end engineer, and then I joined Netlify as a, working on Jamstack, which is essentially like DevOps as a service for front-end developers. Where you rely on creating a lot of single-page and static site apps in the front end, and use serverless functions to stitch together the rest. The problem with serverless functions is that they're very limited in what they can do. I joined AWS with the hope that we would be able to do more. And AWS is starting to innovate on this. They have serverless containers with AWS Fargate. But there's still this idea of lacking a central brain. and basically, like the real wow moment for me was watching DHH demo Rails, that famous 15-minute talk. If anyone in the Rails ecosystem, if they're in the Rails ecosystem, they've seen this talk.
Yep.
And just realizing that I cannot do that with today's technology. I cannot do the full CRUD comments and live updates with today's serverless and React and fancy GraphQL. I don't care what you throw at me. You can't do what Rails did. And then we lost something, right? We moved from the monolith to some sort of distributed system with our front end fancy app and serverless, infinitely scalable functions. But we lost the developer experience of the monolith. That's it. And it's not just about developer experience; it's about development speed.
Yeah.
So I wrote this blog post about okay, I'm basically a salesman for serverless technology right now at Amazon, at Netlify, but serverless isn't good enough. We haven't replicated everything that we lost from the good old days of just, I don't know, run a container or run a rack and stack a server somewhere. And I was just listing the jobs to be done. If you kind of look at it from what do I need out of a platform, I was just kind of listing this, and basically right at the top was a central scheduler or orchestrator of these things, because everything else you can break down into single serverless functions, and that's what was eventually working my way towards. But I just didn't have the background or the words to phrase this, so I wrote up a blog post with here's what I think is missing in the serverless ecosystem, or that we need to reconstitute the monolith. And someone commented, and the VC that was funding Temporal read my blog post, thought it was stupid or something, and then read the comment. The comment was really smart, tried to correct me, right? Hired the guy to be head of product for Temporal, and the guy turned around and hired me to do DevRel. So out of one blog post, two jobs arise.
That's amazing.
I'm currently in his house, and that's what Learn in Public does for you. I think seriously, think about the biggest gaps in your space and write about it, and then that serves as a beacon for other people who are also interested in space to find you and offer you jobs to work on it.
I love that, because it's multiple instances of this reacting to what someone else created. You were reacting to kind of the existing landscape, and you wrote it, and then he replied with a comment, and then out of that, just because all that was public, you were both discoverable to this company that was doing exactly it sounds like what you were both kind of envisioning. So I would say that I got my last 3 jobs this way, right? I definitely have Learn in Public has changed my life, and that's definitely why I continue to preach it to people, even though I feel I feel very repetitive saying the same stuff again and again, but I will do it because it's really changed my life, and I'm only in year 3 of this, and so imagine doing 30 years of this. And I think that's a lot of how the legends in computer programming get going. They just write down what they think, and they iterate on it over years. And it's not about the immediate reactions and like counts and whatever, but really about developing your mental model and relationships with people also interested in that problem. So I don't know if I should should I talk about what Temporal does? I know. I mean, I think it'd be at least worthwhile just to go into the just so people can place it in context. What is it? What does it do? And what is the kind of sales pitch for why people should care about it?
Yeah, it's it really depends on your background, because I can explain it probably 3 or 4 different ways depending on your background. So the general introduction I kind of go with is that you need to, the most important work at any company involves asynchronous work that ties together multiple services. And when I say service, it could be a microservice, could be a mega service, it could be a serverless function. Don't care. It's just external dependency, and then tie to the next external dependency, tie to the other external.
And when you say async, you're talking about the pipes or the things that connect these different services.
So it's beyond the 15-second limit of AWS, the default limit of AWS Lambda doing request and response, right? Those tend to be relatively trivial, or whatever you can squeeze into a 50-second processing window. But you think about all the valuable stuff. So I'm talking about one of our customers, Checker. they're running background checks on gig economy workers, right? Like, and some of that involves making a trip to the court system to pull their criminal records and stuff like that. That can take multiple days. So how do you, or if you think about the origins of Temporal, which is started at Uber, how do you track an entire journey from booking a trip? So like, say I want to travel here, matching with the car, getting on the car, dropping them off, emailing the receipt, doing the rating, and so on and so forth. Like that whole journey, how do you sort of model that, right? You can model that with a bunch of cron jobs and schedulers and different, and there's different teams responsible for each part of this stuff. Yeah. But you need some way to tie all these things together. The traditional way this develops in a microservices hairball is that each service is responsible for calling the next service. But that tends to have a very exponential complexity, and you want to centralize everything into linear complexity with a central orchestrator tool, which a bunch of different companies have built. So Temporal is basically spun out of work that was done at Amazon, Microsoft, and Uber to solve this orchestration problem between services, and that's the first opinion. The second opinion is event sourcing. So deriving everything from immutable log of histories rather than having like a central like mutable state thing, and that this is purely because
is that like getting rid of like a database, or what do you mean by
deriving your state from all the events that have happened up till now? So instead of saying, imagine if you develop your source code without Git, and you would just like save, you zip up your file, and then you like say
you can't revert.
Yeah, exactly. You can't revert. You can't really audit what happened. And if you stopped your work and you transferred to like a different machine, it's very hard to resume in the exact same state because you don't have the precise replay mechanism. So Git is a similar analogy, right? Like you have the log of all events. You don't necessarily need the full log, but it's there if you want it. But more importantly, you can replay anything that happens and restart from any system. So that's how you make the central orchestrator. Because like the problem with introducing the central orchestrator is that you've now introduced a central dependency to every part of your system. And so you need to make it foolproof to that central system going down. And the way you do that is you derive everything off of your logs. Every state has to be logged or it didn't happen, right? So that's the second opinion, which is event sourcing rather than database and optional log, or like a secondary log as a second concern. No, the log is the source of truth.
Got it.
And then the final opinion is the programming model. A lot of orchestrators that are out there. So the competitors are things like Apache Airflow, AWS Step Functions, and I mean there's a bunch of other alternatives. Google has a workflows product as well that they're pushing. All of these are based on JSON or YAML, right? So like which is very amenable to low code. You kind of drag and drop like if this, and then do these things in parallel, and then get the results from here, and then tie them all together and send into one final service. So you end up writing these like very complicated JSON and YAML setups for anything beyond like a trivial if this then that workflow. And the central thesis is that the best language for doing all this is a real programming language, meaning Go, Java, Python, Node, and all the other SDKs that we're doing. Because if you try to stay within JSON or YAML, you end up inventing a DSL, you end up writing an AST
at some point.
Exactly. I think it's Greenspun's law. Like any configuration language has like a lazily half implemented version of Lisp. Or something. I'm misquoting this, but I really believe it's true. Like look at Google Workflows orchestration language, and you have an if, and it's like curly brace, and then like you're writing the AST of a language that you should be writing, and so. Write things in familiar languages and use the libraries that you're familiar with, but also test them in using the standard testing tools that you know and love. So those are the three main opinions I think of Temporal, which is, so I'll recap. The first is that you should have an orchestrator rather than choreography, which is the other terminology. Second is event sourcing, and third is use a real programming language.
Cool. That's pretty cool. If folks want to try that out, do they just go to like temporal.io and
it's open source, so you can run it yourself and not pay us a
Cool.
single cent. And then we run the hosted version, same like
Nice.
any other open source company. Yeah, it's kind of weird. So like the other thing as well is, there are components to this underlying, like it basically solves distributed transactions for you as well, so people use us for that. And I'm having to learn all this as I go, because I'm technically responsible for DevRel and content and stuff like that. And I have but it's good. Like, I think if you develop a reputation of someone who can pick up anything, then that's a very transferable, malleable skill.
Oh yeah, for sure. So what is it? Do you have any like impressions going from being mainly like front end focused to now like diving into all this back end stuff? Like what are your like thoughts on the back end world?
So many. It's a different culture. I actually love it. I really do. The hot take, I'll put this right at the top, is that backend engineers make more money or have a higher career ceiling than front end engineers. Straight up, how many CTOs are front end background versus back end background, right?
Interesting.
Like
that's your claim. That would be your like assertion.
Yes, and I think there's some empirical evidence, but there's no like industry survey or anything of CTOs that how many of you are front end. It just is a natural assumption that if you look at front end engineer, you don't see a CTO in there.
Now, why is that, do you think?
Yeah. So why is that? And obviously, this is not generally true. There are going to be.
I mean, we're just like thinking out loud here.
Yeah. So I think the assertion is that backend engineers command more dollars. Like at the end of the day, like power comes with money, and backend engineers command infrastructure where you pay AWS $3 million. That person is going to be in charge of your tech.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
You pay your what? You pay React nothing. Deal with browser inconsistencies like that. That's going to be a politically, like internal office politics, smaller.
Yeah.
And that's just like the reality of the industry. So part of my own migration from front end to back end has been just in recognition of this fact that front end is not a very valued skill in the industry, partially because it's been so open source. So there's nothing proprietary to this. Everyone can learn it, which is good. Like a lot of people make front end very accessible, right? Partially because I think the experience doesn't scale. Like your job is to make the experience look good on every device, right? Make performant, fast, add really good new features. But backend has a benefit to centralization, like owning the backend for a giant company gives you experience that no other person can independently bootstrap. Whereas in front end, you can kind of self-teach all of it.
Interesting. But wouldn't the converse be that like if you learn one of the popular front end frameworks, that's like very transferable. But if you go on the back end side, what you're doing is working. It's more like bespoke or specific to one particular company, but maybe less transferable from company to company. Do you buy that, or?
That could be the case. I don't want to overstate my claim here. This is just a theory. So whatever it is, I definitely see it the case that backend developers have a higher career ceiling and spend more money. I mean, let's put it down to this: like open source projects, right? Like people struggle really hard in front end to fund open source, whereas in back end, like my favorite example is Mike Perham from Rails. He runs Sidekick. As a solo developer, he maintains Sidekick, the free open source project, and then he sells support contracts for Sidekick Pro. He makes $2 million a year as a solo developer.
Nice.
That does not happen in front end. Does not.
Huh.
So why, right? Like and it's basically because people run more money through back end work.
Interesting.
It's all money. It's like power politics. Like it's. Yeah.
So this is the one of the things I appreciate about you as well, because you have this like dual tech finance background, and you often have like a very analytical and strategic way of thinking about the economics of tech, I guess. And you wrote a blog post on like API economies, the economics of can you talk a little bit about that? Like what is your analysis of, because we live in this age where like seems like every other week there's a new API company that's spinning up. Like, oh, we're gonna build a service that's an API to like this sort of like functionality or this form of like data.
Yeah, talking in terms of bell curve again, the really dumb 80 IQ version of this is Stripe for everything, right? Look at Stripe; they're so successful. That's like API-ify every industry. And that actually works.
So that's the takeaway.
So that's the 80 IQ takeaway. That hey, developers are very powerful, and if you make more and more of the world exposed through an API interface that's manipulatable by programmers, then you can essentially build your own new real estate or a very valuable company, like basically like digitalizing offline services, right? Like a lot of like Web 1 to Web 2 was kind of like this, and I would definitely classify the API economy in Web 2.0. The 120 IQ take, which kind of goes past the 100 IQ peak of the bell curve, is that what happens to the people who stay above, who cannot stay above the API, right? Essentially, we're coming towards like a two-class economy, where either you tell machines what to do or machines tell you what to do, right? The Uber driver is below the API because a machine tells them where to go and what to pick up. Like they are essentially servants to the machine. Whereas if you stay above the API, you're obviously you're an Uber customer or whatever. But as a developer,
are you following what the algorithm is telling you to do versus are you writing the algorithm? Is that kind of the
exactly? Yeah, okay, right. And as more of machine learning, helps to dictate our decisions and content consumption. That's definitely the case. Like a lot of our media consumption is already below the API. So you. You should want. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So finish your thought.
Okay. Yeah. So you have more economic power if you stay above. And what happens to those below? Should we have universal basic income to take care of them? Blah blah blah. Then the sort of 140 IQ take is if you want the most economic power, you manage the people who manage the API, which is the one as much as people complain about being hard to hire developers, if you can manage developers and point them towards a business problem, you have infinite power in this economy.
Yeah, I like that. Can I push back on some aspects of that? So, is it necessarily that there's kind of these like, is it a two-class hierarchy? Because I would argue that, any given person, there's probably things that you do above the API and also below the API. Like, my media consumption, right? Like a lot of it is, like Twitter or Reddit these days. There's algorithms behind all that, like deciding, what to show in those feeds. But then I go and write code, and suddenly I'm writing an algorithm that helps automate some piece of logic or some like rote task that may affect what someone else does downstream. But it's not like I'm on top of them at that point. It's just algorithms are just becoming like embedded in like every part of life, and so they're just these like things that we interact with now. Where previously there was no logic there. It was just a lot of more humans in the mix, or just like no interaction at all because it was too inefficient to do that.
So the pushback is you're not below the API all the time, and sometimes you're above.
Yeah, like the kind of like two class I guess description of that world. It seems very bleak to me.
I mean, I acknowledge this in the post. It is very bleak, actually. It is a problem. But yeah, we're not always above and not always below, but you definitely spend more time above the API than some others. And you see the economic benefits of that. Like that is, it's pretty clear which part has economic value and which part is less economically valuable. And that's just a general statement about, how power flows through the economy and what, like, if you play this, like, we've only had maybe 10 to 20 years of this, like, play this through like another 100, 200 years. Like, we're talking the scale of, we're changing our DNA because an API is deciding who we date.
Right. I mean, as someone who met his wife through an app, then technically, I guess our marriage, our marriage is, I guess, technically below the API in this case.
Yeah, it's really I talk about the economy, but it's actually about civilization, right? And it's really, I don't know what to do about it apart from just raise awareness, but it doesn't have to be a problem, but I think we should, as people who design APIs, should be aware of the awesome responsibility of what we do. We should have people at the table who are represented, right? Because if it's just a bunch of white and Asian guys sitting in San Francisco designing the experience of the world, then something has to break.
Well, I think, a lot of what you're doing is helping with this, right? By learning stuff in public and teaching others and kind of helping with developer education. I think that is, one of the pillars of the path forward here, which is like algorithms and code. They give you a lot of leverage to make an impact in the world. The more people we can give access to that coding ability, the more people will be in kind of this above the API position, or be able to be above the API.
Yeah.
Right.
The manager version of this is above or below the Kanban board. So just to give you that terminology there, right? Who's above the Kanban board and who's below? It's just another thing. So my role currently is more in product than as a developer. So I've also moved further and further away from the developer career path. And that's partially in reflection of this. I don't want to get people too depressed. Like, it's still a great job. Like, we're not going to solve this within our lifetimes, yada, yada. I definitely just encourage developers to think more about the economic underpinnings of their careers. Like, we stress out so much about clean code and frameworks and argue over code style and stuff like that. And don't really worry about are you working in the right company? A full third of my book is career strategy, and part of that is tech strategy. Like, are you working in a company that will scale? Or is it just are you selling dollars for hours? And that has really long downstream effects if you do this for years, right? So when I talk to people about career choice, it's all of this context, building in the macro into the micro decisions of what job you choose. Can
we talk a little bit in the brief time remaining about strategies for learning in public? Because that seems like it's paid off for you a lot, but there's so many different ways that you can be public about your work these days, like different channels. There's Twitter, there's Reddit, there's newsletters are becoming more of a thing now. There's video content and streaming. From your point of view, do you have thoughts or recommendations about if someone's just getting into code, or someone's trying to level up their career, which one of these forums or channels are good, and for what types of learning in public?
I have a few thoughts on this. This great prompt, by the way. One of the reasons I'm so excited to talk with you is you clearly think about these things, which are not technically your job.
Well, thank you.
but you're just generally very curious. Okay, so here's my state of thinking. First of all, pay attention to the Lindy effect, which is how much things tend to stick around and stay relevant. The half-life of content on various platforms is drastically different, right? A Twitter post stays, you should roughly know these figures. A Twitter post stays relevant or discoverable in people's feed for roughly 4 hours. A YouTube post something on the order of 6 months to a year. And blog posts and newsletters stay relevant about 2 to 3 years. And that's kind of when you spend your time, you want to essentially build up a content base or a luck surface area of the maximally amount of still relevant work, which is how people find you and how you can still build up knowledge. Try to bias towards things which are more Lindy is the general conclusion. But that is also too strict, I think. So you want a way, if you only work on things that will last forever, then you may never ship. And so I really like to encourage people to do work in progress stuff. So I've also started to promote this idea, which I actually just published, which is called the particle wave duality theory of knowledge.
That sounds cool.
Right?
Can we do another episode on that?
This is another like one of those 120 IQ things. I don't know if it's too like I don't know if like I'm getting too big for my britches or something, but like this stuff really interests me, you know. Essentially, like so here's the gist, right? If you publish only for like giant massive master works, you know, like that you spend like 40 years to make,
Sure.
people don't really get the benefit of engaging with you, and there's just so much content out there. It's hard to engage with like really monster masterpieces. And so that's why people like to drip feed things over time. And in fact, when you learn stuff, you drip feed over time. You don't learn in one giant leap.
Right.
So that's sort of the wave, the ongoing stream of consciousness of like, here's what I learned today, here's what I worked on today, you know, input, output. And you kind of pair that with something more monolithic, where you say like, okay, here's the big thing I'm building towards, and you can start here and end here, and that's a complete journey. So I think basically there should be like kind of almost like a two-phase commit for all knowledge that you learn and all knowledge that you produce. Right. So you need the continuous stream form, which is can be Twitter, it can be Discord chats, where you say like, here's what I did today. And then you also need the async knowledge base of like, here's everything slotted in its correct proper place, and it's substantial and it's useful as a reference. But you can't build that up, you know, in a stream of consciousness way.
Right.
So yeah, sorry. So
needs to be multi-layered, like yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's exactly 2-layer. Like find a stream to update. So it could be your newsletter, it could be your Twitter, and you can use one for the you can use them for the others. Like a YouTube post can either be a vlog or it can be like the definitive talk on something.
Yeah.
Right. Both are possible. But essentially, try to always do things twice. Right. Try to do the update somewhere. In your daily journal, or in your public tweet stream, and then also store it in its place somewhere else, where you can access it in context. And I think that's my learning public insight. You know, like people. I'll expand this out for you, right? Like if you blog what you learn, as it's really hard to follow because no one's going to read through the whole sequence of blogs. But if you build up a wiki, which is what I've done, right? Like when I learned TypeScript, I didn't learn you know, day by day and blog my journey as I went. I built essentially a public book about React and TypeScript, and that became useful for other people to learn as well.
I see.
So different formats are useful to different people, you know, like again, and there's a reversal of this. Like if I'm an expert, I already know everything. I just want to know the diffs, right? So you just send me the diffs, a continuous stream of diffs, and that's fine. But if I'm a beginner, I want to, I want the nicely presented, formatted, contextualized body of knowledge. So it's that's what I mean by particle wave. Like knowledge can be presented as both a distinct particle or a continuous stream.
So you have kind of two streams. One is like, you know, quick daily or weekly, you know, frequent updates, and then the other one is kind of your long running magnum opus, like the big thesis or like the big idea,
source of truth.
Source of truth. And what you're saying is that you can't derive like the source of truth from the daily updates. It's like you want to have an idea of like what the source of truth is or the big idea that you're working on, and then you just kind of release your like almost like serialize the production of that big work, and that is kind of like the daily update that is like, you know, will capture people's attention and be easier on ramps to the big idea. Is that kind of the idea? Or
I don't care which is primary and which is secondary. I just care you do both, right? Like if you only do one of them, then so for example, if you only do the stream, it's very hard to follow that stream, and it's very hard to know what you currently think now. It's not that useful. And so on and so forth. So yeah, there's a database version of this, which is like, you know, do you only store the logs or do you have materialized views? And I think materialized views are very useful, you know, because they reflect the current state of things. Sometimes you want the history as well.
Nice tie back. That's great. Okay, so just real quick, like what's your example of like your daily stream and your kind of more longer running source of truth?
Yeah. So this is how I kind of write my book right now. So I published version 1 last year, and essentially the community is like the ongoing diffs to that book, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm going to tie up my book. And so people pay for that. People pay for the book, and they pay for the diffs. And then when I publish version 2, I essentially gather up all the diffs and publish an even better version 2. And to me, that produces so much value for people because they can consume it either way. And for me, it was also much easier to write because it's not this big heavy lift. Like I've been working on this book the past year while doing other stuff. And it's just a really great way to be a knowledge worker, I think. And so, I'm talking about writing my own book, but you could apply this to work. You could apply this to building a company. Like, you're very much like, there's the stream, which people are interested, who follow the story are interested in. And then there's the, like, here's how to get started from scratch, right? Your docs, So I definitely think about this in a very fundamental way that permeates. It's a worldview rather than just like, here's the tactical method of like, you publish a blog post, then you tweet about it, then you wait 7 days and you tweet about it again. That's what a social media strategist would do for you. But the social media general would just be like, here's the allocation of resources, and here's why.
This is such a great conversation. Sorry, I'm just like jotting down some notes later because I think this gives me some ideas for like, the next couple of quarters of planning. And
I think, it'd be interesting to apply this to customer relationships as well, right? Like,
I think the whole learning in public and building in public thing totally applies to companies, especially if you're building developer tools. But sorry. It's just a very concentrated form of knowledge work, and what we're really forming towards is like a theory of knowledge work, right? Like how to get this done, how to do really quality focused work, but also keep people involved as you go along. Which kind of is more authentic marketing than anything else you could be doing. Yeah. All right, man. I wish I could keep talking to you for like hours and hours. But you're busy and I want to let you go. Any kind of like final parting thought, or maybe like a call to action for listeners or viewers of this?
People always are inspired by the Learn in Public story, and then they write their first blog post, and then they tag me on it, and they want me to give them kudos, like congrats, pat on the back, like good job, first blog post. But just understand that this is a journey and a lifestyle. Like the benefit is all back end loaded, in the sense of like, you have to do this for a while. You have to find your voice and find your audience. And eventually the benefit starts to compound. And that's the problem with compounding. Like, it looks like it doesn't work at the start.
It looks like this. It looks like a flat line.
Like any exponential curve. So I definitely try to bootstrap people by talking about pick up what they put down, like focus on organic interactions with individuals rather than building up a general faceless audience. Because then you start to not care about numbers, because you only care about, did I have a good interaction or not? And you build up enough of those over time, then you will get numbers. But if you start out with that as your goal, I don't think you have the right mindset to achieve the results that you want. Yeah.
That's great advice. All right, man. Swix, this is great. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I've been enjoying the podcast, and I'm just glad that you invited me on, because I love having chats like this.